It's 6 p.m. on a Monday here in Korea. Welcome to our newscast. I'm Daniel Che. Let's start with the headlines. Holding vigils for victims is not enough. France responds with fury, undertaking airstrikes on Raqqa and northern Syria after IS claims responsibility for the horrific attacks in Paris. Though the focal point of G20 meetings is conventional economic issues, fighting terrorism has become a key topic, with President Park Geun-hye calling for global efforts against what she described as the cancer of the international community. And UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon may become the first UN chief to visit North Korea in 22 years. If confirmed, reports are correct, and if so, expectations are high should he meet with the regime's leader, Kim Jong-un. We'll start with France's response to Friday's terror attacks in Paris. Police have been carrying out dozens of raids since early Monday morning, arresting suspects and seizing weapons. And French jets have been pounding Raqqa and the Islamic State group's stronghold in the northern Syria. For the latest, we connect to our Connie Kim, standing by the Newscenter. Connie?
Daniel, French police seized an arsenal of weapons in dozens of pre-dawn raids against suspects on Monday local time. Now, the raids were focused on the Lyon area, where police made 5 arrests and seized a rocket launcher, an assault rifle, bulletproof vests, and handguns. French Prime Minister Manuel Valls says there is danger of more terrorist attacks in Europe in the coming days. Now, this comes less than 12 hours after France dropped 20 bombs on Raqqa, the de facto capital for ISIS in Syria. It's seen as the first direct retaliation for the attacks in Paris. A command and control center, a recruitment center, training camp, and arms depot run by the extremist group were targeted. The aerial raids were launched from bases in the United Arab Emirates and Jordan on Sunday night local time. There is no word yet on how successful the strikes were, nor if any civilians were killed. This comes as the ISIS group took responsibility for the Paris attacks that killed 129 people and injured hundreds more, many critically. A massive international manhunt is underway for a Belgium-born French national, Abdeslam Salah, who is believed to have been involved. And according to CNN, the 26-year-old was questioned by French police shortly after the attacks, but was not detained. A total of 6 attackers detonated their suicide belts, killing themselves. 2 of the attackers have been identified. A 29-year-old French national, Ismail Mustafa. He was apparently known to France's security services, but had never been charged with any terrorism offenses. The other is Bilal Hafti, a Belgian resident who is either 19 or 20. It's believed he fought in Syria before coming to France.
Well, it's important to grieve for the victims, but just as important is bouncing back up and resuming normal functions to deprive the twisted terrorists from any satisfaction. Connie, I hear museums and other cultural spots will be opening soon?
Right, Daniel. With Paris slowly beginning to get back to normal after Friday's deadly attacks, the country's culture ministry said museums and landmarks, including the Louvre and the Eiffel Tower, will reopen 1 p.m. Monday local time. But as you can see from the video footage of the memorial service at Paris's iconic Notre Dame Cathedral on Sunday, it'll definitely take time for people in Paris to carry on with their daily lives.
I think of the families today who are in mourning and distress, and I came to pray at Notre Dame for the peace of these poor people who are now dead and their families who are in pain and sadness.
I wish I could say we have to find a solution. I don't even know what that could be, but we have to come together and at least support each other.
In Korea, the country's Vice Foreign Minister Im Sung-nam visited the French embassy in Seoul on Monday to express Korea's condolences. The embassy has also been seeing regular folk come by as well to pay their respects. A Parisian living in Korea says he's touched to see the support for France.
The first feelings is sadness. We are very sad what happened to the country we loved. We are very happy to see all our people who support us from all the countries. I'm very touched to see that we are not alone.
Vigils are being held around the world, and iconic buildings in Shanghai, New York, and San Francisco have been lit up in blue, white, and red, the colors of the French flag. In cities around the world, people are united praying for Paris. Daniel, that's all I have for now. We'll have more updates in our later newscast.
All right, thank you for that, Connie. Turning to Turkey now, on day 1 of the G20 summit, anti-terror efforts were front and center of discussions. Condemning Friday's bloodshed in Paris, President Park Geun-hye called for global efforts to counter the scourge of international terrorism. Hwang Sung-hee files this report from Antalya.
World leaders observed a minute's silence to remember the victims of recent terror attacks at the start of a two-day G20 summit in Turkey's resort city of Antalya. This year's summit has been overshadowed by the deadly attacks on Paris. At a working dinner on Sunday, President Park denounced the bloodshed.
The president stressed that terrorism continues to evolve. Its new forms threaten the lives and basic values of people around the world. She said terrorism has become a cancer within the international community that hinders world peace and security.
At the working dinner, world leaders focused entirely on terrorism and the refugee crisis, calling them the most urgent global challenges. President Park said the UN Security Council resolution on blocking the flow of foreign fighters to Iraq and Syria must be put into force. She added South Korea will contribute by bolstering legal measures to sever the flow of cash to terror groups. The South Korean leader said the terror attacks on Paris calls for the attention of not only the G20 leaders, but also the collective intelligence and courage of the world. On the final day of the summit, the leaders will adopt a joint statement reiterating their commitment to stay united in combating terrorism. This will be the first written statement issued by the G20 on any political issue. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News, Antalya.
While the Paris attacks have turned the G20's focus toward defeating terrorism, conventional economic issues have not been put aside. During the meeting's first session, President Park revealed her plan to support annual joint investment by the international community for Northeast Asia worth $63 billion. The amount is based on the projected yearly demand for infrastructure development in the region, including from North Korea. But the senior presidential secretary for economic affairs told reporters that the plan could only go ahead if Pyongyang gives up its nuclear program. President Park also spoke about her initiative to create a Northeast Asian Development Bank, a proposal she had previously made to individual countries, but not at a multilateral event until now. With conflict in Syria growing, U.S. President Barack Obama and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin met informally on the sidelines of the G20 summit currently underway in Turkey, though the move is seen as an effort to confront Islamic State militants. According to our Sun Jung-in, some major disagreements remain.
Speaking at the G20 summit in Turkey on Sunday, U.S. President Barack Obama pledged to increase efforts to eliminate the Islamic State militant group and bring about a peaceful transition in Syria.
And as we, I'm sure, each said to President Hollande and the French people, we stand in solidarity with them in hunting down the perpetrators of this crime and bringing them to justice.
Putting aside their long-standing differences on the Syrian conflict, Obama and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin were seen engaged in an intense conversation on the summit sidelines. Although the content of their talks was not disclosed, a White House official later said the two leaders agreed on the need for UN-sponsored peace talks between the Syrian regime and the country's opposition, as well as a ceasefire to resolve years of war. But Russian officials described the meeting less optimistically, saying that while they shared similar strategic goals in the fight against IS militants, the two countries remain in disagreement on tactics. The U.S. and Russia have been at odds over ways to resolve the growing conflict in Syria. While Washington has criticized Putin's deployment of Russian forces there, Putin has defended the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in the face of U.S.'s calls for his departure. Sun Jung-in, Arirang News.
The Paris attacks have also sent shockwaves through the local financial markets, causing the government to say it's keeping a close eye on the situation. Hwang Ji-hye gives us the details.
Despite the Korean stock market already turning bearish due to a possible rate hike from the U.S. Federal Reserve next month, it's now being hit by uncertainty coming from Friday's Paris attacks. Korea's benchmark Kospi dropped more than 1.5% on Monday to close at a near two-month low at 1,943.02. The local currency also plunged against the greenback. But many analysts do not expect panic in the local financial market down the road, saying market reactions to terror attacks are often short-lived. They add global market resilience has increased in line with the growing number of terror attacks over the years. Holding a meeting the same day, the government said it will carefully monitor the financial market and work on minimizing any possible impacts from the recent attacks. It did express concern, though, over the attacks posing a threat to the Eurozone's recovery momentum, that this could drag down the overall economy, including China. The European Union is Beijing's second largest export market. Now all eyes are focused on how the local markets will move on Tuesday after the European and U.S. stock markets react to the attacks and join what is expected to be a global sell-off. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Friday's terror attacks in France have prompted Korea's National Assembly to move toward anti-terrorism legislation and establishing an anti-terrorism response center. However, rival parties find one more point of contention: which government body should supervise the center. Kim Young-gil has more.
The ruling Saenuri Party wants to set up a terrorism response center under the National Intelligence Service to specialize in preventing terrorism in Korea, but condemns the opposition for arguing the NIS would abuse its authority.
The opposition bloc is concerned that the spy agency might use the Anti-Terrorism Center to conduct illegal inspections of anti-government organizations and abuse human rights during intelligence gathering or investigating possible terrorist groups.
The ruling bloc is concerned that in comparison with Western countries rushing to legislate anti-terrorism laws after the U.S. 9/11 attacks, the Korean parliament has consistently failed to do so since 2001. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy says, based on past scandals, the NIS cannot be relied upon to supervise a possible anti-terrorism center.
We are against setting up a counter-terrorism centre under the NIS. The NIS has been embroiled in several nationwide scandals involving election meddling, hacking citizens' smartphones, fabricating false espionage cases, and cracking down on leftist groups.
Rather, the MPAT suggests establishing an anti-terrorism agency under the Ministry of Science, ICT and Future Planning to deal with monitoring signs of possible terrorist activities and intelligence gathering. The ruling party and the government warn that with 2 million foreigners living in Seoul and with Korea being a traditional staunch U.S. ally, the country is prone to terror attacks from Islamic extremist groups.
Meanwhile, the government confirms that since 2005, more than 70 Koreans have either died or been injured in terrorist attacks in foreign countries. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Sticking with local politics, over at the National Assembly, 5 bills aimed at revising Korea's labor market reforms laws were scrutinized today by Parliament's Labor Committee. The bills pushed by the Park Geun-hye administration and ruling Saenuri Party target Korea's labor market in an attempt to make it more flexible. They include revisions to the Labor Standards Act, the Employment Insurance Act, and the Act on the Protection of Fixed-Term and Part-Time Employees. The ruling party says passage of the bills is urgent, adding the changes would benefit employees with shortened working hours, prolonged part-time contracts, and strengthened employee insurance. However, opposition parties argue the revisions will not only make layoffs easier, but would worsen rather than protect working conditions for irregular employees. Now, will there be a diplomatic breakthrough in Pyongyang? UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon will reportedly visit Pyongyang this week, most likely to meet the regime's leader, Kim Jong-un. Song Ji-sun looks into what we can expect from the trip if he indeed makes the historic visit.
Citing a senior UN official in New York, Seoul-based Yonhap News Agency reported that UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon will visit Pyongyang this week and hold talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. With a slew of issues expected to be on the table, including human rights and the regime's nuclear ambitions, the source says Ban won't return empty-handed. With diplomatic channels closing in on Pyongyang, the international community has been strengthening sanctions, further isolating the communist regime. Pyongyang is likely to deliver any message it has through talks with the UN chief. With just a year to go until his term ends, Pan has long tried to visit Pyongyang to bring the communist regime back to the negotiating table. He had earlier planned to visit the North Korean border sea of Kaesong in May, but Pyongyang withdrew their approval at the last minute without explanation. The United Nations said it has no further comment at this time, with the South Korean government saying they have no knowledge of the trip. If Ban does make the trip, he will become just the third UN Secretary General to visit North Korea, and the first in 22 years. The UN chief will likely transit via a third country, as Seoul's Unification Ministry said it did not receive a declaration form from Ban to enter North Korea. 송지선, Arirang News.
That's it from us for now. For more updates, tune in at 10 p.m. Korea time for Moon Gun-young's Newscenter. Thanks for watching.